Thank you all for joining us. Looks like we've got more than 40 people on this thing today, which is exciting to hear there are so many people interested in this topic. I also wanted to thank Sarah and the Getting Hired team for putting this together. We're excited about our new partnership to continue to help veterans and their families find meaningful employment. So let's get right into it. And as Sarah mentioned, if you have questions, please do feel free to ask. So a bit about myself, Easterseals Veteran Staffing Network. I am an Army veteran. I was a machine gunner for 6 years, a million years ago. I still had knees. Easterseals will be celebrating its 100th year anniversary next year. And a lot of people, when they think about Easterseals, say veterans. In fact, we've been supporting the veteran community since World War II, although we are deeply involved in supporting people on the ground with disabilities and empowering them. The veteran community was a special group that was falling through the cracks, and that's what Easterseals does. We catch people who fall through the cracks. The program that I run, the Veteran Staffing Network, was created almost 6 years ago. We are a very unique program in the realm of nonprofits. Our job is to create an employment program for veterans and their families that doesn't rely on federal funding or philanthropical support. Essentially, we deliver a social mission of intensive career coaching to empower these men and women and their families from any era to learn the skill of job search, and I'm sure many of you on the phone would agree today it's a skill. And the way that we pay for that intensive career coaching is we take the job-ready men and women we work with, and we engage the business community like a commercial staffing and professional services firm. The fees that we receive when we place that veteran or military spouse go back into our program, and that's what pays for the infrastructure and social support to deliver. So that's kind of who we are. The only people we serve are people from that military community. So someone transitioning out now is somebody like me out 20 years ago. Pretty much anybody who's ever worn the uniform or supported them. That also includes Guard, Reserve, dependent children, caregivers, wounded warriors, et cetera. And our clients are Fortune 1000. We work with a lot of government contractors as well. So moving forward, today we're going to talk about the life cycle of the veteran candidate. And that is really for you attracting, evaluating, onboarding, and retaining these men and women in your organizations. And obviously you're here because you recognize the return on an investment from this community. So before we get into that life cycle, let's talk about the men and women that we're actually looking at. A lot of people who don't understand military ranks. Now, I don't show this slide to you because there's going to be a quiz at the end. But what I am trying to help you understand is that the same thing is said very differently in all 4 branches of the military. So, for example, someone in the civilian world that might be John Doe in the Army is Private Snuffy. In the Marine Corps, he's Schmuckatelli, Lance Corporal Schmuckatelli. In the Navy, he's Schmuckatelli. In the Air Force, he's Airman Smith. So we say the same thing in a lot of different ways, and that's an important thing for you to understand. It's very confusing when you're looking at it from the outside. So let's break it down into 2 main buckets, officers and enlisted ranks. And for those of you who already understand this community, I apologize for rehashing. So officers, these are people who are bred in the military to kind of be the managers and the planners, the strategic thinkers. They're setting out broader goals and objectives. The enlisted folks are actually the operations part of the team, if you want to think about it. Junior enlisted, your privates through E5 is where you're starting to get into non-commissioned officer. They're elevating out of that, but they're the frontline men and women who are getting the work done that's designed and developed by that officer community. The senior enlisted, NCO stands for non-commissioned officer. This is really your operations management, okay? These men and women have kind of come up through the ranks. They understand how it works. And quite frankly, non-commissioned officers are the backbone of the military. These are the men and women that really make the impact. And these are people that I really recommend you target for your organization. So junior enlisted, again, private, airman, sailor, corporal, petty officer, we say the same thing with different words. Frontline workers. They're 1 to 6 years of experience. And out here, they could be technicians, tradesmen, they could do customer service work, and those who are reaching the rank of E3 through E5 is when they start really getting into junior management of people and parts and things of that nature. Your junior enlisted. Now, this would be a great resume if we had a magic wand. junior enlisted person coming out, identifying their work experience, they're a team player, they supervise, they've got a degree, they're working on a degree. This is a great resume from a junior enlisted, right? The reality is this is more likely to be the type of resume that a junior enlisted person would put out. Now, if you notice, this person is in the workforce to make himself a better computer for future jobs, right? So they don't want your job for your job, they want it for the next job. You may have noticed that he's deployed in combat zones, he's taken courses in hand-to-hand combat, he's got a background in folk-style wrestling, he's proficient with firearms. This is how he's introducing himself to your job, right? All of these things are true, but is this something we want to put out, right? He's got the ability to argue positions effectively and write in an articulate manner. So this is a real person. When I first put this presentation together, Enrico was in Ohio. And this is very, very similar to what you folks are probably going to encounter as you're evaluating these candidates. Now, senior enlisted, these are more experienced men and women. They've been through the ranks. They've probably had the opportunity to go and pursue secondary education. Maybe they've even completed their bachelor's degree and they're working on a master's degree. They have been around a minute. They've seen good things and bad things. They've worked in really stressful situations and had to excel at whatever their skill is, whether that was people management, project management, doing analysis work. I mean, let's face it, there's very few jobs out on the civilian side that don't have a direct military correlation. So there are people who've been there and done that in almost every job there is in the civilian community. And so these people are great at coming in as an operations manager to the facility, coming in as a project or a program manager, depending on what it is. Great candidates. Their resumes are typically a little better put together. Again, they've been around, maybe they've gotten some coaching, they paid attention to the exit TAP program, and they knew they were getting out of the service versus some of the younger and less experienced folks who just didn't give it the credit it was due. So a little bit easier. JMOs, junior military officers. So these folks have a degree, almost 100%. They come in as a lieutenant or an ensign, for example. Again, we say the same thing differently. And they continue to move up. They've been through things, they've seen things, they've been involved in operational strategic planning, and then ultimately evolving up and beyond that, depending on what particular discipline they work in. They step in as that middle management person, being able to contribute really at the thought leadership level is where they're getting into. Great folks to target, but everybody's targeting them. So just realize that. It's a smaller subsection of the entire military community, and it's the one most sought after. So I'd really challenge you to say, is this a group of people we want to focus on, or is there riper fruit on the tree somewhere else? Also, you'll notice down there, warrant officer 1 through 5. Warrant officers are kind of unique in the military. They're really specialists at what they do. These are subject matter experts. And 1 through 5, you find somebody who's a warrant officer 5, that individual is really specialized in whatever his or her discipline is, very focused. JMO resumes, typically a lot tighter, right? They've got the ability to communicate a little bit more effectively than a lot of their enlisted counterparts because they've completed that education. They've had to write papers, et cetera. So to kind of give you a broader view of what this looks like, your E1 through E3, you can see that front line. E4 through E5 is that entry-level supervisor. E7, E9. Now, E9 is when you're getting into like the sergeant major, command sergeant major ranks. They are really no longer deep in operational management, but they're in operational strategic planning, aligning with what those officers are developing, right? And then underneath you can see kind of where the officer ranks also land. Moving along, salaries. So if you're unfamiliar with how these people are getting paid in the military, basic pay, okay, of $24,000 a year. If they're getting a meal allowance, they may also be getting a housing allowance. They're also getting a tax advantage. They also aren't paying for their medical insurance while they're in uniform. So you can see their compensation is a lot bigger than most of them even realize. So one of the things for you to consider as you're courting this community is to make sure you understand kind of what they're getting paid, understand what their perspective is. And I've worked with a lot of folks who lowball military people coming right out, particularly the younger ones, because they can get them cheaper. But what they don't realize is as soon as they're talking to their buddies and their colleagues and their friends and finding out they got lowballed, they're going to leave your organization. And that's not why you wanted to bring them in, I hope. We talked about that, pension and retirement we didn't talk about. Also, if a service member is deployed, hardship duty for, you know, if they've got to leave their families for an extended period of time, hostile fire combat pay, hazardous duty pay, these are all other cash incentives that they receive. If we look at occupations, again, I said there's not too many out here that they don't have. So if you look at your own organization internally and think about the kind of roles that your company hires for, I'm willing to bet that a few of these bullets map to your needs. So keep that in mind. So now let's talk about what we're here for. Now we have an understanding of kind of who we're trying to bring into our companies. How do we do that? And there's really 5 main buckets, if you will. And I'm going to talk through them as we go through. I'm not going to read them for you. You'll see a little bit in each one. The first things first is your executive champion. This is somebody on your senior leadership team who is going to be visible to the world, going to write articles, talk to the press, wave the flag, if you will. Say, our organization is going to hire veterans, right? This executive is also going to need to be the person involved in the strategic planning of a veteran hiring program, right? They're going to have to fight for things in budget meetings to make sure that the right resources are in place. They're going to kind of be your go-to with that executive team. They also need to be focused on the need for internal change and why this is a driver for it, right? They're going to be interfacing with different departments depending on your type of organization, getting word from the ground, creating focus groups, those kinds of things. And then I think that 5th bullet right there is probably the most important thing for your executive champion to do, and that's really making sure that it's okay to take a risk for recruiters and hiring managers. And I'm going to give you an example. If I'm a recruiter, my customer is really the hiring manager, and that person is going to hand me a job description and tell me to bring 10 people who look like this piece of paper. And if I give this person a veteran on paper, he's going to go to my boss, or she's going to go to my boss and say, why is David wasting my time with somebody who doesn't look like they are fit? Even though I may have qualified this individual on the phone for 45 minutes to an hour, it doesn't fit the mold, right? So I, as the recruiter, don't have a blessing to take a risk on somebody I feel is strong. And additionally, hiring managers are also under very similar pressure. They're working really hard. A lot of times they don't have a chance to review resumes before the interview in depth. So they need to be told, listen, this is a community we want to hire from. You have the blessing to take a risk on somebody you feel is a fit, and a recruiter needs to hear the same thing. And this is normally in front of an audience. I'd say makes sense and raise my hand, and everybody would be nodding. So hope that made you smile. So right language. Are you speaking corporate or military? So as I mentioned, there's a lot of different words used in the military community that are not used in the civilian community. So think about the language you're using, and particularly the audience, which kind of segment of that military community you're courting to. And if you're not quite sure how to do that, you can certainly go find a few veterans in your space and get their opinion on some of the language that you're using to represent your organization to that space. What MOS or MOC codes are relevant? So an MOC or an MOS is an alphanumeric code that describes your job description. So I was a machine gunner in the infantry in the Army. So I was an 11B, often referred to as an 11 Bravo, right? A doctor's got a different nomenclature. And so those codes, if you go into this link here, you can kind of reverse engineer and enter those codes in there and see the skill sets associated with different military occupational specialties, or you can enter the types of characteristics and skill sets that you're looking for and find out what those military occupational codes are and then target those particular ones because those folks will likely have a better fit for your company. And then using media effectively. So if you think about your website, most of our websites have a significant amount of information, and we try and direct people to them. But they're not necessarily communicating to a military person. But if you take your company name, you know, abcconsulting.com/military, and that's the link that you represent when you're communicating to the military community, when I, as a veteran, click on that page, it's going to be written in a language that is more catered to who I am as a candidate versus what your website is catered to everywhere. It also shows your organization has a commitment to hiring military because it's got its own space. If you use social media on one or more channels, which a lot of people do, make sure that you're communicating tweets or, you know, Facebook posts or Instagram photos or, you know, whatever your social medium of choice is, so that you're generating content in the world where these veterans are living that help demonstrate that my organization is veteran friendly. And another thing a lot of people don't think about is you've got veterans internal already, right? You've got, you know, Frank or Sarah who's been working here for 8 years after they successfully transitioned out of the military. They love working here. Well, go do a quick bio on Frank or Sarah. Get his or her picture, you know, put that up on social media. Put that up as a testimonial on your veteran-oriented webpage. Again, all of these things are going to help you get the right image in place. Develop partnerships. And so what I mean by that is the veteran community is very fractured. There's no magic way to reach them, as I'm sure you've discovered. And so what we do at the Veteran Staffing Network, and what I encourage all of our clients to do, is begin to form partnerships with those organizations that are touching veterans on a daily basis. So you've got each state is going to have a labor division, a workforce division, and a veterans office. Some organizations, like the Commonwealth of Virginia, for example, those two government departments are very tied together. Veteran employment is a huge initiative here in the Commonwealth. I don't know if it's the same in your state, but I definitely recommend you go connect with those organizations and let them know you exist and you want to work with the veteran community. Department of Veterans Affairs at the national level, certainly a great place to plug in, and then they can direct you to the right resources for where you're operating out of. Veteran Service Organizations, or VSOs for short. These are organizations like the American Legion, AMVETS, MOA, which stands for Military Officers of America Association, something like that. I was enlisted, so I don't know. But there's a lot of these organizations out there that cater to the veteran communities. By finding the ones that have a local chapter, office, branch, or presence where you're working out of and connecting with them, they're going to have a community. Whether or not any of them have candidates, I don't know, but it's a great place to broadcast the opportunities you have. American Job Centers, for those of you who don't know what those are, that's the rebranded unemployment office from when I was younger, right? And the American Job Centers are funded by the Department of Labor at the federal level, and there's about 2,300 of them across the country. A great place to go and at least get the word out about your organization. Inside the American Job Centers, you'll see DVOP and LEVR there. DVOP stands for Disabled Veteran Outreach Program. LEVR stands for Local Veteran Employment Representative. These are people, most frequently they're veterans themselves, who are state employees. And their whole job is to go and find out what veterans are operating in their regional American Job Centers and build relationships with the employers in that area to try and connect the dots. So these can be very valuable people, particularly when you're focusing on the veteran, disabled veteran community. And then nonprofits. I'm going to give Easterseals Institute here, right? We can help you find veterans, but there's a lot of other nonprofits that are out there who serve veterans on a regular basis. And these can be houses of worship, for example. They can be chambers of commerce. I mean, one of the biggest drivers in veteran employment has been hiring our heroes, which is operated as a Chamber of Commerce at a national level. So a lot of partnership opportunities you can get there. Consistent messaging, we talked about that. Are your website and marketing materials in sync? So if you build a website page, for example, web page, for example, that's catering to veterans, what about the marketing brochures that you're handing out at job fairs? Do they say the same corporate stuff that you guys have on the regular one, or did you morph and create some customized materials for the military community? And then lastly on this, are you pushing your message to military-oriented platforms? There's a lot of websites out there that cater to the military community. I suggest you go and find some of those organizations that are kind of in your bucket and at least let them know you're alive. And then this is a really cool thing that I was just made aware of right around the time that Getting Hired and Easterseals became partners. And they launched an MOS translator, Military Occupational Skills Translator. And I understand, Sarah, we went live just at the end of August. They've had more than 300 original searches for MOS codes. So this is somebody like me who doesn't know anything. I come across Getting Hired's webpage. I type in my code, and those companies that have jobs that match who and what I am from that code, I'm going to be exposed to. So we're really excited about this. It's going to really increase the traffic of veterans and people with disability into Getting Hired space, and clearly that's going to serve everybody here on the phone. So kudos to Getting Hired for continuing to innovate. I love it. Okay, evaluating. So this is how we kind of look at these candidates and say, do I want them? Okay, so I'm going to challenge each of you to just take 30 seconds and scan those skill sets. These are what we call transferable skill sets, right? Almost everybody needs them. So pretty much anybody who's been in uniform for any amount of time has received some level of training in each of these topics. And so if this is important to your company, don't you think finding somebody who's already got these built in is beneficial? But knowing these intangibles, be specific about what else you need, and I'll speak to that in a minute. So for some people leaving the military, they may have never even had a job interview. And I'm talking about people who've been in the military for 25 years, and they don't know what they're doing. They know how to give a report, but they may never have had a formal job interview. One of the things that we teach at the VSN is veterans need to think about their individual accomplishments, right? So to give you some perspective, there is no I in the military. Some of you have maybe played team sports, get what I mean? Everything happens in the military as part of a group, whether it's a big group or a little group. It's never just me that got it done. But when we are interviewing somebody, I don't care what your unit, squad, and fleet division did. What did you do, Bob? And if you're unable, as Bob, to tell me about your individual successes and what you did there to make things work, I'm not going to value you as well. So please understand as you're engaging these people in interview sessions that you try some pull questions. Help them think through the accomplishments, because I'll tell you, there's an awful lot of really amazing accomplishments inside the military. You know, a squad leader in the infantry, for example, could probably be a 20-year-old kid who is responsible for anywhere from 4 to 10 people. Each one of those people is carrying close to, I don't know, give or take $500,000 worth of inventory, depending on the type of unit that it is. So imagine at 20 years old being in charge of millions of dollars worth of equipment, men, materials, right? So sharp kids. If they use an acronym or a title, that's just language of the military. It's too hard to say a lot of stuff, so we use initials and acronyms. So if they're using those kinds of words, please don't let it put you off. Ask them what they mean. Ask them what it was involved in. Those kinds of things will help you discover the diamonds through the rough. Also, you may find they have a little bit of difficulty in relaxing. It's okay to understand that, even make them feel more comfortable, and tell them that it's okay to relax, right? In the military, there's attention, which is stiff as a board, super respectful, and then there's actually a command called at ease, which means relax. So understand these people have been programmed in some form or fashion to be instructed to relax when they're in a formal environment. We already talked, if you don't understand what the candidate's describing, ask more questions. Lead the candidate to answer your questions. So I'll give you a great example. If you came to me and you said, David, tell me about your customer service skills. When I got out of the Army, I was a 23-year-old machine gunner. They paid me to hide behind rocks, trees, and bushes and blow stuff up real good, right? And if you said, tell me about your customer service skills, I would have looked at you like you hit me in the face with a frying pan. But if you said, David, can you tell me about a time where you had to help somebody and you didn't know who they were, but you had to help them nonetheless, man, I got dozens of stories about that. Major Smith rolled up and his Humvee wasn't ready, and I didn't know who Major Smith was, but I had to help him. So I ran and found the duty sergeant to help get the, right, that's customer service. That's what you're looking for. So think about that as you're evaluating these candidates. When you have a built list of skills that you need for a position, ask them to tell you a story about how they used this skill set. Because if you don't ask them to explain, they're going to give you short answers like, yep, I got that. Just look at the resume. It's right there. They're not going to know that they need to give you a lot of detail unless you ask for it. Right? That's how it works in the military. Give me the highlights. I'll ask for details. And have them, right? So we already gave the example of the corporal who's leading people in the field. Right-hand man to the air boss. This is one of my favorite stories. So I was teaching a class down in Norfolk as part of the beta for the employment workshop I did for the Department of Labor. And the homework assignment on Tuesday night was to go home and think about 3 accomplishments that you had in your career so that we could get them on your resume. And so it was 6:30 in the morning, and I was setting up the classroom, and this young gentleman comes in, 27-year-old, and he said, Dave, I can't think of anything. I said, all right, son, what do you do for the Navy? He said, well, I'm the right-hand man to the air boss. And I said, stop right there. First of all, I'm Army. I don't know what an air boss is, and neither does anybody else. And so for those of you who don't know what an air boss is, an air boss is the officer on an aircraft carrier that's in charge of all the aircraft, all of it, right? Lot, 300 something. I don't know, it was Army. I was never on one. But they're pretty busy. And because that officer is most commonly focused on the aircraft that are airborne, the right-hand man to the air boss is in charge of the flight deck of an aircraft carrier. So for the last 3.5 years, this 27, 28-year-old kid, I shouldn't call him a kid, was in charge of schedules for 200 to 300 people, maintaining safety trainings. Oh, he could also launch $20 billion of American property in 10 minutes during a scramble drill. When I shared this with him, he just said, I never thought about it that way. I just did my job, right? Now, imagine somebody could communicate that effectively to you when you're sitting on the other side evaluating this person for your job. You might have a very different perspective than someone who said, I'm the right-hand man of the air boss. So I encourage you to kind of dig under the covers a little bit. Other things, quartermaster, just so you know, these people send stuff in and out of their warehouses all the time. They're moving people and materials across the globe. It's good stuff. Logistics and NCO, I guess it's the same kind of stuff. And again, you'll be able to get access to these files. These are just a few examples. Ask them about how they've managed people before, right? Make sure that you cover some of the intangible skills that you want in your employee, and ask them to kind of talk about how they use those things. And then dig into the metrics. I think the metrics will sometimes surprise. It'll probably surprise the veteran too. Say that 3 times fast. Okay, so onboarding. We've made the decision that we like Joe or Jane. We want to bring this person into our organization, right? So in order to do that, we need to educate the hiring authorities inside our house, right? We talked about that executive champion. Well, this is where leadership has to drive that initiative. They've got to give the blessings. Educate your hiring managers, if you're one of these executives, on the return of investment for making a good hire, right? Typically, veteran workers, more productive, and they have higher initiative. And who doesn't want someone with initiative, right? Instead of waiting for somebody to tell you what to do. Very well trained in the world of safety. We get safety training almost daily. And if you hire the right person for the job, their tenure will be about 30% longer than the average civilian worker. So you want to talk about realistic return on investment, maintaining that worker and his or her knowledge and the cost of replacing that person, what you lose from an institutional knowledge when he or she leaves, definitely a cost savings. So onboarding and buddy programs. Now, there's other ways to say this, and I've met a lot of companies who do something similar to this. If you don't, I really recommend it. It works even great for new hires that aren't military. But the idea is something simply like this. When I get a job, and I'm a veteran, and I start with XYZ company, and let's say Sarah is a veteran in a completely different department who's also an employee of XYZ company, we get matched. Sarah has volunteered to be a buddy, and so Sarah just works with me. She's an outside ear, right, to help me get acclimated to XYZ. So her role as the, buddy, the mentor buddy, would be something like, call me on day 3, call me on day 5, call me on day 10, day 15, and then, if I'm local, take me out to lunch. And that's pretty much the commitment, right? Because I need to get to know my boss. I need to get to know my coworkers. Some of the office slang isn't familiar to me, and I don't want to look silly by asking what that is. So Sarah is kind of an umbilical cord for me to reach out and speak with her, right? So I hear a lot of companies say, we've done a veteran employment survey, and we get poor responses. I know we have veterans working with us, but, employment surveys are no good, right? And you're right. There is no advantage as an employee of XYZ. If I've been working for XYZ for 4 years and you do an employee survey asking if I'm a veteran, why would I go through the process of raising my hand? There's no advantage, right? However, if you launch a veteran buddy program asking for mentors, and at the same time you do your veteran population survey, you're going to get a really good response. And the reason is, as a veteran, I want to help my brother or sister be successful when they get the job here. I want to help them. Sarah might have been Navy and I'm Army. And yeah, the branches banter between each other all the time, but in reality, when we get on this side of the fence, we're all from the same family. And so we really want to make sure that we're helping each other out as much as we can. So, veteran population survey, launch a buddy program. It's great. Other ideas, we talked about custom materials for job fairs rather. Have a little bit of custom materials created for that veteran new hire. Just a little something extra. If you've got an employee resource group, we'll talk a little bit about those later. Maybe some successful veterans who are already working there, kind of a profile of them. Make sure that the details in your new hire packet are correct, right? Because a lot of veterans are very attention to detail oriented, and if you're missing some stuff, they're going to lose respect a little bit. And clear onboarding procedures, right? So for those of you who are non-military, as hard as the life is, it's actually fairly easy because we know where we need to be. We know what we're going to be wearing that day. We know what we're going to be doing that day for the most part. Everything's planned out. It's what we call right and tight in the Army. So if I come in and I've got a plan in place that says, day 1 through 3, you're going to do this. Day 4 through 6, you're going to do this. Day 5, and that's not what happens, I'm going to make you think you're not organized, or in military speak, you're not squared away. So just something to consider. So looking for other support systems, resources. Department of Labor great resource, obviously. Career One Stop and the Department of Veterans Affairs, all at the federal level, and they can certainly drive you down to some other resources that are available to you. So how do we keep these men and women? We've made a significant investment in training our team and redesigning some marketing materials. We've launched the website. We've launched a buddy program. We've gone and collected interviews from our veterans about success stories. They're working for us. Now, I will tell you that there are figures out there that veteran new hires last less than a year. So people are afraid to hire veterans, right? Because everybody wants to hire a hero, but nobody wants to fire a hero. And that's why I recommend you do your job as an organization in screening these candidates effectively. I mean, we need to do that with every hire we have, I would assume. But hopefully the information that we're talking about today will allow you to have a more targeted approach to the veteran community so that you can hire the right veterans, not just a veteran, so they stick around, okay? So keeping them, train them, expose them to training, as much training as you can afford to give them. We train every day in the military on something. They are used to it, and I'll tell you what, they'll get bored if you're not training them in some fashion. Give them cross-training or multifaceted training because they can expand their skill sets pretty quickly. If you've already got an internal training program established, something that you use internally, and you're not familiar with the Skill Bridge and Apprentice programs out there, I really recommend that you check them out. Skill Bridge essentially is if you find someone who's going to be leaving the military and they're approved by their commanding officer, the military will actually pay that individual to go intern at your shop for free for 6 months, or up to 6 months. So I'm getting out. I'm an HR representative. You want to hire veterans, you contact the Skill Bridge program. I could actually come learn how to work in your office while Uncle Sam is paying the dime on my way out, and I think all you have to do is give them an interview, right? So something is really cool to check out. And then you can go see some other incentives out there for hiring, to include, I believe, the tax incentives for hiring veterans are still in play. It gets renewed every year, so I'm going to hope it's going to get renewed this year. Providing a clear path to success. Again, we're used to structuring goals. We're used to understanding how we get promoted. We're used to being informed about what our goals are to get done. Enforce accountability for all. So you want to keep a veteran, treat everybody the same. So in the military, it doesn't matter if you're white, black, green, blue, yellow, purple. They have a saying in the Army, all green here, right? So they are conditioned to, ideally, environments where everybody is on equal ground. And if you want to turn a veteran off, create a place that's not offering that kind of environment. A veteran recognition program. So this is really just a little something inside your organization that highlights veterans, right? So we already talked about doing bios for veterans who've been there for a while. Something that Hilton did, I'm close with them when they started their program, something small but very powerful. If you go into a Hilton, you'll notice everybody's got a name badge, right? What they did for veterans who joined and identified is they just put the little insignia of their respective branch on their name tag. Something small. Somebody who, if they didn't know what it was, wouldn't know what it was. But it's a little something that recognizes me as an Army veteran. Other people, guests who see that, hey, you're Army? Yeah, I'm Army too, right? Can start that. It's a little thing that went a long way. If you guys use, cards to access areas, your name badge cards or something, consider having that option, putting their insignia on it, David Army on my little badge on the thing I got to key the door with. Other ideas, employee resource groups. If you don't have one, create one if hiring veterans is important to you. And make sure it's a group that's mixed of veterans and non-veterans, right? it's good to have a diverse perspective. Veterans typically have their funnel of vision and civilians have theirs. So mixing these groups together is a good idea to create company policies or create recommendations for policies and initiatives to help build that population. Community service projects. A lot of organizations have some type of community give back. If you don't, I recommend it. Feel good things are good for you. But veterans, military service, it's inherent in the job role is service. And so if your organization is creating programs for community give back, it's a great way to get your veteran population engaged. And then use a veteran spokesperson, right? This is somebody that is willing to go and speak in front of cameras, right? Not just the bio of David, who's been a veteran with us for 7 years, but trot Dave out on the news, right? If you can get a media piece or shoot it yourself, put it out on a YouTube channel. Get a couple of veterans who are willing to go and be that internal veteran face to the world for you. And so now that's pretty much where I wrap up. I like to leave about 15, 20 minutes for questions, and I like to make sure everybody gets out on time. So, Sarah, I'll open the floor to you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that there may be.
Yeah, thank you so much, David, for all this great information. I have been just fully engaged the entire time because for me, not being a veteran, there's so much to learn about this space, and I think it's just really helpful. All of the information you share for recruiters, hiring managers, everybody in between that's involved in the success of veterans getting back into the workplace. So that being said, with all this information being shared, if I had to ask you kind of a summary question, maybe two things, because I'd be impressed if it was just one, but maybe two things that you would like to, again, reiterate and summarize to the audience, just to keep in mind for when you are looking to hire veterans. So you don't have to answer the retention and the onboarding part, but just the first part, because I believe that recruiters are really the face of your organization. They're the first ones that have that touch point with the resumes and to really have the power to see who gets let into the door. So for those groups, is there something that you would summarize for them?
Yeah, so for recruiters, there's lots of training out there for recruiters to learn how to hire veterans. Really, it's the blessing from on high and then the blessing from the hiring managers to be willing to take a risk. They need that approval or they're not going to go outside their lane, right? I mean, have an organization, I've met with many organizations that want to thump their chest about hiring veterans, but they don't see any veteran flow because their recruiters don't see what they need, right? So I would say for the recruiting level, it's definitely the blessing to take a risk and then make sure that they have access to training, whether it's paid or access to go and learn stuff. And then I think for both the recruiter and the hiring manager, it's consider how you ask your interview questions and do some more pulling than taking the answer at face value, because there's a lot of important information and detail under the surface of that answer that they can provide you if they know you want it. They just don't know what you want, right? So I guess that's probably three things. Sorry, yeah, I couldn't do one.
No, that's perfect. And so, again, just an etiquette question. So if somebody discloses that they are a veteran, if it's not apparent from their resume or if somehow you don't find out ahead of time and they say that to you, whether that's through a phone interview or in person, I personally always default saying, thank you for your service, and then potentially just continuing with the conversation just to make sure that they're treated like any other candidate. From a disability perspective, we always advise do not ask that person what disability they have or engage further in that. Again, treat it like the normal process that you would for anyone else. But for a veteran, if they disclose that information, are there any certain questions that are appropriate or inappropriate to ask, or that as a veteran you would like to have somebody ask you that typically you don't hear that's asked?
Well, you certainly can't ask anybody if they have a disability or what kind of disability, right? Because we don't want to create discrimination issues. But if someone does disclose that they're a veteran, I think a very reasonable question to ask is, would you need any accommodations to be successful in this job, right? I happen to have a pretty good hearing loss and tinnitus, right? So accommodations for me could be, you know, a sound machine that plays in the background, which doesn't make my ears ring as much, or the ability to play my music or my talk radio at a low level to kind of break up the ringing in my ears, something like that, right? Somebody who may have a lower back disability, maybe they need a stand-up, sit-down desk so that they can function in the same workspace. You know, there's a lot of disabilities out there, quite frankly, that are invisible, as I'm sure you guys help educate people on. So my accommodation might need, you know what, I need a flexible schedule because I've got to go to the VA for my PTSD treatments or whatever it is, right? So do you have any, do you feel you would need any accommodations to be successful in this role, right? And then if they don't share anything, I think that's kind of where you let it lie and see where it goes from there.
Yeah, that's great. I think that if I had to, you know, take a guess or draw a parallel to what we advise from the disability standpoint, or really just for inclusion of any candidate, it's just offering that. That's super helpful. So I think that's great information. We have two other questions. So the first being, organizations that don't have an executive champion for veterans or a veteran who is an executive leader, do you have any advice or tips on ways to identify someone who might be a good fit for the role?
Okay, so if you have someone who's not a veteran on the executive team, they may have a family member, they may have a friend who served. It's got to be someone who is passionate about the veteran community. Whether or not they wore the uniform doesn't really matter. I've met a lot of people who have done amazing things for people in uniform, and they never wore the cloth of their nation one day in their life, whether they just never had the opportunity or they didn't qualify for entrance or whatever. So it's really finding someone who, at the executive level, believes that veterans coming in the door are going to be important to help the business be bigger, stronger, better, right? It might be someone who's a numbers person, right? And you can talk about the ROI and the lower turnover and the higher productivity. It might be somebody who's emotionally attached to the veteran community because of friends or family. But out of that executive community, however many executives are in your organization, whether it's 1 or 20, somebody's got to rise out of there to give blessings to the rest of the family that we want to hire veterans, and here's why. Does that make sense? Am I answering the question?
Yeah. No, okay. I think that's a great reminder. You know, for me, I don't personally identify as having a disability, but I am a caregiver to somebody who has a disability, and I have family members and close friends. So my passion for this space comes from the fact that I have very, very direct connections to it, and I drastically want to improve the experience for them. And I think that's a great reminder and great advice to what you provided. No, I think that's perfect. Another question that we had is, this person agrees that veteran resumes can improve dramatically prior to transitioning out of the service. So what can we do to help TAP personnel better prepare transitioning vets?
Okay, can you ask that one more time, sir? I don't think I caught the whole thing.
Sure. So ultimately talking about what can we do to help TAP personnel or TAP personnel better prepare transitioning veterans. So helping them specifically in that personnel, but just in general too, what else can we do to help transitioning vets?
So it's an interesting conundrum, right? I was pretty deep inside the TAP program there for a while. Essentially, on the front end, you can't do anything, right? They are mandated to go through the TAP experience. The employment workshop is just one part of that 1 week long class. They get 2.5 days of training on how to get a job, write a resume, et cetera, right? And if you think about the experience, a lot of these people attend because it's mandatory and they have to check the box and they're falling asleep in the back of the class. A lot of people don't care about getting a job because they're going to school. A lot of people aren't even sure if they're going to re-enlist. A lot of people just want to get back to their girlfriend or boyfriend or go see their friends on the block and drink back a couple of beverages. So there's a myriad of reasons for why people fail in TAP. It's not the quality or the content of the delivery. But where organizations can be engaged, one is introducing themselves to the transition manager. There is an individual on each base that is, most bases have a transition office, that is responsible for the transition of soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardsmen coming out of that location, right? So making friendlies with that person is a good way to at least get your name out there. Sometimes they'll let you kind of advertise who you are depending on who it is. There are opportunities to volunteer. Not every place has the same opportunity, so I would say it's site-specific, where you can get in and offer to, you know, teach a side workshop or teach about your company or something like that. But as far as inserting yourself into the dynamic of the transition assistance program provided by OSD, Department of Labor, and all the branches of service, you're not going to be able to wiggle in there anytime soon.
Yeah, and from what, you know, we've understood from veterans who are on our team here at Getting Hired, and from your presentation, I think, you know, that's great advice, great answer to where, exactly to your point, it isn't a straightforward answer. There are so many different resources to pull in and so many different organizations to connect with and efforts that we all have to collectively make in order to help with that transition. One other question that we had, I think we have time for one more. So many companies hire veterans for the right reasons, but also would like to remain compliant with OFCCP requirements for their company. Could you touch on protected veteran status for the group?
So, and I think we're talking about compliance with organizations that are receiving more than X amount of federal compensation for services, right? OFCCP?
Yes.
Okay. So that was instituted by an amendment to USERRA, I think, and GOVRA, which essentially gave targets for hiring persons with disability and veterans into an organization. And the numbers have fluctuated over time. And I was actually at an one of the briefings of those OFCCP briefing about 7-8 months ago. And it's still a goal, it's still a target. But as far as I know, there are no financial penalties for not meeting those targets. At least that's what I heard 6-7 months ago. I would not be surprised if financial penalties show up at some point. The best kind of track I would say you'll probably see is the track that affirmative action, when it first got put into play, ran. I think you're going to see something similar for these populations of veterans and people with special needs and people with disabilities. So it's a good idea to have the plan. It's a good business's decision to hire these people. But as far as the way OFCCP thinks, I think it's just guidelines to the best of my knowledge. But I'm not an attorney. I'd really recommend you talk to an attorney about that.
Sure. No, I think that's perfect to know. And just have it reiterated from you, who we're kind of looking to as a subject matter expert in this. So that's just great to have that reiterated from your perspective as well, so thank you.
I just want to caveat, I'm not a subject matter expert when it comes to OFCCP. I could talk myself right into a corner pretty easy, so.
Oh, no, I mean, for veterans at least, I mean.
Okay, yeah.
Yes, sorry, so for veterans. But I think that's all the questions that we received. I know we have a couple minutes left, so happy to give everybody some time back to their day. But David, wanted to sincerely thank you again for all of the great information that you shared. And to everybody on the line, just a reminder, we will have a recorded version of this that we'll be happy to share out. We will not be sending out a presentation deck. So just look for that email from us. But thank you again to everyone who participated and attended, and have a great rest of your day.